The wind outside howled like a wild beast. Snow blasted across the frozen plain, burying rocks, machines, and memories. The sky was dark blue, full of icy clouds. Nothing moved. Except the storm. Inside a small tent, a human named Dan sat cross-legged, beside a heating unit. His face was tired, his jacket was thick, patched many times. His hands were rough and red from cold work. This planet, Corin 6, was not made for life, but Dan was here anyway. A scout. A survivor. A man running from old wars. His tent was the only warm place for kilometers. Outside was death in minutes. Dan poured hot water into a metal cup. He had just one meal left. 2 days until the supply drop. Maybe 3, if the storm cleared. His eyes closed as he took a sip of the warm drink. Then, something moved. Outside the tent. At first, he thought it was wind, but no. This was heavier. Slower. Footsteps. He froze. His hand reached for the pulse pistol beside him. Then, a soft thump. Something touched the tent wall. He stood slowly. Carefully. "Who's out there?" he called. No answer, just wind. He moved. Toward the flap. Opened it slightly. A figure collapsed into his arms. She was shivering. Almost frozen. Her skin was pale blue with glowing lines running down her arms. Her hair was silver, full of frost. An alien girl. Dan pulled her inside, quickly sealing the flap behind them. He wrapped her in a thermal blanket and turned the heater higher. Her lips were turning purple. Her eyes half open. She looked at him, weakly. "You're not like the others," she whispered. Dan blinked. "Others?" She didn't answer. She fainted. He checked her pulse. It was weak, but there. He placed a heater patch on her chest and gave her a sip of warm water. Her body trembled, then stilled. Dan sat back and stared at her. Who was she? What was she doing out there, alone? And what did she mean by others? He watched her for a long time. Her body was covered in strange marks. Some looked like scars. Others looked like tribal symbols. Or maybe royal. He didn't touch them. Instead, he whispered to himself, "What did you walk away from, Snow Girl?" 2 hours later, she woke. Her eyes opened slowly. Pale violet, glowing faintly. She looked around the tent, confused. Then sat up quickly, gasping. Dan raised his hands. "Easy, you're safe." She looked at him. Her breathing slowed. Then she whispered, "They'll be looking for me." "Who?" She shook her head. "Can't say." "Why not?" "Because if you know, they'll hurt you too." Dan frowned. "Look, lady, you almost died out there. I deserve to know something." She looked down. Her voice was low. "I escaped from a ship. I was supposed to be delivered." "Delivered?" he repeated. "To who?" She met his eyes. "To someone who thinks owning people is tradition." Dan felt something in his chest shift. He hated that word. Owning. He had fought in a war because of that word, and walked away from it when too many forgot what freedom meant. The girl pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "I didn't know where to go. I just knew. Your signal was different." "How?" "It felt kind." Dan looked away. He didn't think he was kind, just tired. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "Scylla." "I'm Dan." Silence. Then she whispered, again, "Please, if they come, don't give me up, not even if they offer you everything." Dan looked at her. Her face wasn't proud. It wasn't noble, it was scared, and he'd seen too many faces like that before. "You're safe here," he said quietly. Then the tent sensors beeped. Dan turned toward the control pad. Outside, through the storm, a ship was moving low across the sky. Scanning. Watching. They had found her trail. Dan looked at Scylla. She met his eyes. Afraid, but trusting him. He grabbed his rifle. "We stay warm tonight," he said. "But tomorrow, we run." The storm outside was louder now. Wind slammed against the tent like waves crashing on steel. Snow and dust scratched the walls like claws. The ground shook lightly with every gust. Dan checked the scanner again. The ship was gone. For now. But the movement? Still there. Faint heat signals. Circling. "They're looking for you," he said quietly. Scylla sat near the heater, wrapped in the blanket. Her hands trembled as she held the metal cup of warm water. "They always look," she replied, "until they catch what they call theirs." "You said you escaped," Dan said. "From a ship." She nodded. "Were they human?" She looked up sharply. "No. Worse." Dan raised an eyebrow. "My own people," she whispered. "Royal blood doesn't protect you when you disobey tradition." He sat down across from her. "What kind of tradition?" Scylla hesitated, then said slowly, "On my homeworld, then some girls are given away. Not for love, not for choice, but to join bloodlines, to keep power inside families." Dan's jaw clenched. "They call it sacred. I call it a cage." He looked at her carefully. "You ran." She nodded. "I was never meant to survive out here. Just vanish." Dan said nothing for a while, then finally, "Why come to my tent?" "Because your signal didn't feel like a trap." "You could feel that?" "Not with my eyes," she said. "With instinct. With silence." Dan blinked. "You felt silence?" "Yes," she said. "Everyone else broadcast noise, threat, ego. But you were just quiet." Dan didn't know what to say to that. No one had ever described him like that before. Later that night, Dan unrolled a second heat blanket and placed it on the opposite side of the tent. "Get rest," he said. "We move at first light." "To where?" "North side. I have a signal beacon there, hidden, encrypted. Will it bring help?" "Not sure," he admitted. "But it might bring options." Scylla crawled under the blanket. Her body still, shook lightly not just from cold, but memory. She watched Dan. "You're not afraid of me. Should I be?" Some would say yes. "I don't listen to some." That made her smile a little. Just a small one, but it was real. Hours passed. Dan slept lightly, one eye always half open. His hand rested near his rifle. His breath was calm, but his mind wasn't. And that's when he heard it. Crunch, footsteps, not storm. Someone, or something, just stepped near the tent. Dan sat up without making a sound. Scylla was already awake, her eyes open, alert. She whispered, "They're here." Dan didn't move toward the flap. He didn't breathe hard. He simply whispered, "Stay down." Scylla nodded and pulled the blanket over herself. Dan crawled slowly to the back corner of the tent, unzipped the emergency panel, and looked through. The gap. Outside shadows moved, 4 figures tall, armored, not fully human, not fully alien either. Royal hunters. They scanned the snow with glowing sticks. One of them knelt near Dan's footsteps from earlier. They pointed toward the tent. Dan sealed the panel and looked at Scylla. "They're coming," he said. "If they see me, they'll mark you too." Dan grabbed a thermal core from the heater and tucked it into a decoy coat. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Buying us time." "They'll kill you." "Maybe, but not before I show them what quiet really means." Outside, the tent flap opened, and the thermal decoy rolled out. The hunters rushed forward, guns ready. But it was empty. By then, Dan and Scylla were already gone. Into the storm, into the dark, their footprints vanishing behind them like they never existed. Far above, a ship received the alert. Inside, a commander growled. "They're still running." His officer nodded. "The humans clever." "Clever," the commander whispered, "but not lucky forever." The cold was no longer just cold. It was pain. Wind scraped their faces like blades. Snow stung their eyes. Dan walked first, boots sinking into the deep frost with every step. Scylla followed, her breath shaky but steady. Behind them, there were no more footprints. The storm had erased everything. How far now, she asked, voice muffled by her scarf. Few more kilometers, Dan said. North Ridge. The signal post is buried there. Are we safe? He glanced back at the storm, then at her. Not yet. They crossed into the ashlands, a burned zone from an old planetary war. The snow turned gray here. The wind was quieter. Too quiet. The ground was uneven. Large pieces of melted metal poked out from the ground like frozen teeth. What happened here? Scylla asked. Battlefield, Dan replied. About 20 years ago. Fusion bombs. Nothing survived. She looked around. Nothing. He stopped walking. Almost nothing. Hours passed. The wind dropped lower. Dan checked his tracker. Battery low. We camp here, he said. Here? Can't go farther without rest. He set up a small emergency dome, smaller than the tent, harder to detect. It had no heater, only insulation. Inside, they sat shoulder to shoulder. Her fingers were blue at the tips. He handed her a heat capsule. Bite this. It warms your core. She did, and then whispered, I don't think I've ever been this tired. Dan smiled, tired too. Welcome to my kind of vacation. She chuckled softly. I don't understand you. That's okay, he replied. I don't either. Later that night, Scylla couldn't sleep. She sat awake, staring at the wall of the dome. Dan's breath was steady, but he wasn't fully asleep either. Do you regret helping me? She asked. He didn't open his eyes. No. Even if it kills you? Especially then. She blinked. Why? He opened one eye. Because I've seen what silence does to people. I stayed quiet once, and someone innocent died. He looked at her. I won't let that happen again. Scylla looked down. I was supposed to belong to someone. Not just marry him. Belong to him. Like a gift. You're not a gift, Dan said. You're a person. Her eyes watered slightly. Thank you, she whispered. But under the ice, something else moved. Beneath their dome, inside the old battlefield, a buried machine blinked. A guardian. Half alive. Half broken. Ancient. It was programmed long ago to defend royal assets, to scan for markers, and Scylla wore one, a genetic tag, hidden inside her skin since birth. The machine registered it. Target, protect. Status, active. It began to rise. Dan and Scylla didn't hear the cracking ice until it was too late. Boom. The dome shook. Then the ground split open beside them. A giant hand, made of old steel and bones, punched through the snow. Dan grabbed Scylla and rolled outside. A creature, part robot, part fossil, climbed from the ground. Eyes glowing red, steam bursting from its cracked chest. Scylla gasped. What is that? An auto-guardian, Dan said. Used to protect royal blood. Then why is it attacking? Dan looked at her. Maybe it thinks, you're in danger from me. The guardian scanned Dan. Target, non-royal. Armed. Threatening posture. It raised a cannon. Scylla stepped in front of Dan. No, he's not hurting me. The guardian paused. He saved me, she shouted. The machine twitched. Processing. Recalculating. It lowered its weapon slightly, but still stood ready. Dan whispered, Can you shut it down? Scylla nodded. Maybe. If I connect to its command port. Then do it. I'll cover. She ran toward the machine's side. Dan fired warning. Shots to distract it. One beam almost hit him. He dove behind a rock. Scylla reached the control panel. Her fingers shook as she input the code. Her family's code. Something she swore she'd never use again. The machine paused, then said softly, Command accepted. Danger. Passed. And it shut down. Fell forward with a deep metallic sigh. Dead. Again. Scylla sat down on the snow, exhausted. Dan limped over, bruised and breathing hard. Well, that was new, she laughed. You're always getting injured for me. Nah, he said. You're just bad luck. She elbowed him gently. Thanks for not shooting it to pieces. You trusted it, he said. So I trusted you. She looked at him, eyes warm, real, and for the first time since she entered his tent, she didn't feel like a guest. She felt like a teammate. The morning after the Guardian attack was cold, but calm. The sky was clear for the first time in days. Sunlight bounced off the white hills, making everything shine like broken glass. Dan sat on a rock, watching steam rise from his hands. The bruises on his shoulder were dark. He didn't complain. Scylla sat nearby, quiet. Something heavy hung between them. Not anger, but something unspoken. Finally, she broke the silence. I need to tell you something. Dan looked at her, waiting. She didn't look back. The people chasing me, they're not just royalty. They're the Council of Bondcraft, the highest power on my world. What do they want with you? He asked. She took a breath. They want me to reproduce. Dan raised an eyebrow. What? My bloodline is rare, pure. It holds old genetics they fear will vanish. They want to bind me to someone. Not for love, not for choice. Just to keep the line going. She finally looked at him. They were going to force it. Dan's fists clenched slightly. Not because of her, but because he had heard similar horrors before. During a war he never speaks of. He didn't interrupt. Scylla continued. I ran, but the tag inside me still makes me a target. It's why the Guardian woke. It's why they'll never stop. She leaned forward. And being near me, it puts you in danger. Dan nodded slowly. I figured that out. She waited, but he didn't say more, so she asked, And you're still here? Why? Dan's voice was quiet. Because running alone breaks people. I've been there. You? He looked at the snow far away. Once, I was sent to destroy a base. Orders were clear. No survivors. We hit fast. Burned everything. Scylla watched him closely. But it wasn't a base, it was a refugee camp full of kids, families. His jaw tightened. I didn't know until it was too late. Scylla's eyes softened. What did you do? I disobeyed. Pulled 3 kids out of the fire, hid them in a wreck, got court-martialed for it. She moved closer. And the children? They lived? He looked at her now. But I didn't. Not the part that believed in orders. Not the part that thought medals meant anything. Scylla reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. So, she whispered, you understand? More than you know. They sat close now, not because of cold, but because there was no one else left to understand them. I'm not just a runaway, Scylla said. I'm a rebel by birth now. Then what do you want, Scylla? She took a deep breath. I want to live by my own choices. I want to decide what matters, who matters. Dan nodded. You've got one now. She looked confused. A choice, he said. You can keep running, or we can stand, together. Scylla blinked slowly, then whispered, And if I choose you? Dan didn't smile, he just held her gaze. Then I choose you too. Later that night the wind came again, not as a storm, but as warning. A small beacon lit up on Dan's scanner. Unknown signal. Faint. Fast. A scout drone, Scylla saw the signal. Flash. They found us. Dan grabbed his pack. Then we moved fast. To where? To the beacon. The real one. Hidden under the glacier. And after that? He looked at her. After that, we stopped running. Far above, in low orbit, a warship floated in silence. Commander Rix watched a red dot blink across his screen. The royal mark is active again. His officer asked. Should we capture her now? Rick shook his head. No. Now. We let her. See what happens when you love a human. His smile was cold. She made her choice. And soon, she'll regret it. The glacier stretched for miles, endless ice, glowing blue veins, a frozen desert with no mercy. Dan and Scylla moved fast, boots crunching snow, their breaths white in the air. Above them, the sky had cleared, but it was a trap. Clear skies meant open targets. How much farther? Scylla asked, voice low. Dan checked the scanner. Less than 2 clicks. There's a cave. Beacons buried inside. And after we activate it? He looked at her. We wait. Behind them, the sound of engines echoed. Scout bikes, flying low, fast, silent. The hunters had found them again. Dan grabbed Scylla's hand. Move. They ran across the ice shelf. Faster, harder. Their feet slipped. Their hearts pounded. Blaster. Fire lit the snow behind them. One beam hit the ground near Scylla, exploding it into shards. They dove together into a frozen crack. They're faster, she said. But we're smarter, Dan replied. He tapped his wrist console. A hologram of the terrain appeared. We can cut through an old mining tunnel under the glacier. It leads straight to the cave. Scylla nodded. Let's do it. They dropped into the tunnel. The walls were narrow and dark. Metal beams held, the ice in place half rotten and shaking. It smelled of rust and memory. You've been here before, Scylla whispered. Dan didn't answer at first, then said, This is where I hid the kids. Scylla looked at him gently. The ones you saved? He nodded. We slept right over there, he pointed. For 3 nights, silent, no light, just hope. What happened after? Someone picked them up, someone good. He didn't say more, but Scylla could feel it. This place hurt him, but also healed him. Suddenly, crack. The ceiling above trembled. A hunter drone had dropped onto the glacier above. Its weight shook. The tunnel. Dan grabbed Scylla. Run now! They sprinted forward. Metal creaked. Snow fell from above like dust. Behind them, ice collapsed into the tunnel. The drone fell through, legs snapping, but its core stayed active. It crawled after them like a spider with blades. Scylla turned and fired her alien sidearm. The first shot missed. The second hit the drone's sensor, blinding it. Dan spun around and shot the fuel line. Overhead. Boom. The fire melted part of the tunnel and buried the drone in boiling snow. They didn't stop to watch. They ran. They reached the cave minutes later. Inside, it was quiet. Ice covered every surface like glass. Glowing crystals lit the room. In the center, a black beacon post covered in frost blinking weakly. We made it, Dan said. Scylla dropped to her knees, gasping. Barely. He walked to the beacon and wiped it clean, then inserted a chipped key into the panel. Lights turned red, then blue. Transmission active. How long before it's picked up? Scylla asked. Depends who's listening, Dan said. Then he turned to her. Are you still listening? She frowned. What do you mean? You said you chose me. You still mean it? She stood slowly, stepping closer. I've never changed my mind. He touched her hand gently. Then whatever comes next, we face it together. Even if we don't win? He looked into her eyes. Some fights aren't about winning. They're about being worth remembering. But outside the cave, cloaked figure landed in silence. Not a soldier, not a hunter, but someone else. Someone from Dan's past. A woman in black armor, with a human war badge on her chest. She scanned the cave and whispered, Dan, I finally found you. Inside the cave, the beacon blinked. Outside, she stood. Her armor was dark, lined with battle scars. Her face was covered, but her voice, Dan knew it before she even stepped into the light. You never change, she said softly. Dan froze. Scylla looked at him confused. The woman removed her helmet, blonde hair, sharp eyes, and a scar running across her cheek. Commander Rhea. Dan whispered. Sayla stepped forward. Who is she? Rhea answered, voice calm but cold. I'm the one who watched him walk away from a mission that could have saved hundreds. Just to protect 3 children. Dan flinched. I thought you were dead. You left me, Rhea said. You turned your back on command. On me. Scylla watched the tension rise. Dan clenched his fists. Those kids didn't deserve to die. And what about the soldiers who did die because you delayed the attack? Rhea asked. That was never on me. Rhea pointed to Scylla. And now, you protect her? A tagged alien runaway? You really haven't learned. Scylla spoke quietly. I didn't ask for his protection. I chose it. Rhea laughed bitterly. Oh, how noble, but it's not your choice anymore. She raised a small device, a royal command stick glowing red. I've been paid to return you, Scylla. Alive. Dan stepped between them. Then you'll have to go through me. I was hoping you'd say that, Rhea said. Blaster fire exploded in the cave. Dan pushed Scylla behind a rock and fired back. Rhea moved like a shadow. Fast, trained, deadly. Scylla shouted, You can't beat her like this. Dan ducked behind a column of ice. Wasn't planning to. He activated a side tunnel collapse. Rocks rained down behind Rhea, blocking her exit. But she kept coming. Dan's shot grazed her shoulder. Hers hit his arm. He dropped his rifle. Scylla ran forward, held her blaster with shaking hands. Don't, Rhea shouted. You shoot me, you start a war. They'll come for both of you. Scylla's hands trembled, but she didn't lower the weapon. I don't care anymore, she said. I'm done running. Rhea narrowed her eyes. You'd betray your people for this human? Scylla didn't blink. No. I'd betray the system that tried to own me. The air was heavy. Dan sat on the ground, blood on his arm, breathing hard. Scylla, he whispered. You don't have to do this. She looked back at him and smiled. Yes, I do. She pulled the trigger. Not to kill, but to hit the wall above Rhea's head. Ice cracked. Snow fell. Rhea stepped back, stunned, long enough for Dan to grab Scylla's hand. Run, he shouted. They escaped through a back tunnel, barely dodging falling rocks. Rhea fired once more, missed, then watched them vanish into the shadows. She didn't chase. She just stood there, shaking with rage and something else, regret. Outside, beneath the stars, Dan and Scylla collapsed beside a frozen ridge. They were covered in snow, bruised, tired, bleeding, but alive. Scylla pressed a heat patch to Dan's wound. She was your partner? She asked softly. More than that, he said. Once. Do you still care? Dan looked at Scylla. Not like I care about you. She held his hand. Then don't leave me. I won't, he whispered. Not again. Far above, command received a report. Target escaped. Guardian systems offline. Bounty team failed. A voice replied, activate full retrieval squad. We take them both, or burn the planet. The snow had stopped. Stars lit the night sky like tiny fires above the frozen world. Dan and Scylla stood at the top of the ridge, watching the sky. Above them, black dots moved, ships, not rescue, retrieval. They're coming, Scylla said softly. Dan nodded. They'll land by dawn. Scylla looked at him. We can still run. Dan shook his head. We've done enough running. She stepped closer. So what now? Dan looked at the horizon, glowing faintly red. Now we stand. They spent the night preparing. Dan set up the beacon to loop their message. A call for help, but more than that, a story. A record. He recorded everything. Their names, what they escaped, what they refused to become. Scylla added her voice too. Not as a princess, not as a victim, just as someone who wanted to choose her life. The message ended with her whispering, I didn't enter that human's tent to fall in love. I entered because I was cold, and what I found was the first place I ever felt safe. The next morning, ships landed, black, armored, silent. Elite teams stepped out, weapons ready. But Dan and Scylla were already standing at the top of the frozen hill side by side. Hands empty, hearts full. A loudspeaker boomed. "Step down. Surrender the girl." Dan replied, "You'll have to melt the whole planet first. You will be erased. Then erase us," Scylla called out. "But we'll still be remembered." The soldiers didn't move yet, confused, because their helmets picked up something else, a signal broadcasting everywhere, not just to the ships, to the galaxy. The message Dan and Scylla recorded, their story, was already being played on news screens, rebel networks, and even royal feeds. People were watching and reacting, some in anger, but many in tears. One soldier stepped forward, then stopped, removed his helmet, and knelt. Others followed. The commander shouted, "What are you doing?" But no one answered. Dan held Scylla's hand. "We didn't fight to win," he whispered. "We fought to mean something." And they had. Months later, a camp stood where the tent once was. Not military, not royal, just quiet homes, warm fires, and freedom. A place for those who ran, and those who refused to run anymore. Dan fixed old machines. Scylla helped lost children find their voices again. They never wore crowns. They never spoke loudly. They didn't need to, because the galaxy remembered them. Two people who chose each other in a world that wanted to break them apart. And every time a refugee knocked on their door, Scylla would smile and say, "You're safe here. I know what it's like to be cold. But here there's more than just warmth."